I wish I could have just grabbed the characters and been like, when will you learn? Your actions have consequences. But, you know. Hi BookTube, it's Marianne at We Last Wear Book, and today we are wrapping up the first half of March 2021. So, in my TBR, I had said that I was going to be reading the Ripped Bodice award winners for 2020 this month, and you know what, it's going great. I've read 11 books so far. Normally by this point it would only be about 8, but the books have been so good that when I've been reading them, I've been so into it that I've not been able to put them down. So far, all the books that I've read have been 4 or 5 stars, bar one. So it seems like we're on a roll. Not all of the books in part 1 of my wrap up are from the Ripped Bodice Award winners, because I kept some of them on my Kindle to use for the Kindle Clear Out readathon. So I'm going to go through these chronologically as usual, and we're going to start with Go Deep by Rosie Adams. Now, I've wanted to read this for ages because everybody was reading it during the Black Author readathon in February and loved it, and it centres around the characters of Nevaeh and Xander. Nevaeh writes erotic fiction for a living, and she's losing kind of inspiration for her books. Her readers are becoming kind of bored with what she's putting out. She hasn't had sex in a long time, so she's like, I need to get some action so that I have some inspo for my books. So she propositions her best friend Xander and is like, look, you're my best friend, we're there for each other, you fully support my career, so why don't we come to an arrangement where we have some sexy times, and then I can use that as fuel for my stories. And he agrees to it. And they are both determined that they're not going to catch feelings for each other, but obviously as they're becoming more intimate, they catch feelings. The book was really spicy. I was totally 100% here for it. The chemistry between the characters was totally believable. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Even though it was just a novella, I feel like there was a lot packed into the book, character-wise and plot-wise, that it was enough for me. I didn't feel cheated out of the romance, even though it was short. It was very spicy, the sex scenes were really well written. 4 stars out of 5. It would have probably extended to 5 if there hadn't been any conflict. I feel like there didn't really have to be conflict there, but that's just me. The next book I read this past fortnight was The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I have problems with this cover. There's some really bad Photoshop happening in this cover. I'll include a close-up image of some of the parts here. It seems pretty sus, but the cover's not the most important part, it's the story. So this tells the story of Agatha and Penelope. Agatha owns a print shop, she's a widow, and Penelope is a beekeeper. So the story starts with Agatha. She works as a printer, and she finds a bee colony in her warehouse and needs someone to take care of it. So that person ends up being Penelope, and then Penelope and Agatha develop a really nice friendship where they trust each other. It's really wholesome. I loved it. Both of them are in quite precarious positions, with the fact that they have sort of growing fondness for each other. Obviously, in the time period that this was set in, which was, I probably should have checked this, which was 1820, obviously same-sex relationships were not accepted. They were frowned upon. Women did not have the same rights as men. And within the story of their blossoming romance, there was sort of feminist undertones where the Queen was accused of adultery, which caused a political uprising, which they ended up involved in, and Agatha ended up caught up in it as well because her printers were printing sort of defamatory materials against the king. There was a lot of information on beekeeping, and I've seen people in some reviews saying that they felt it was unnecessary for the story. I think if you're just looking for romance, then maybe this isn't the best option. But like I said, there was a lot of focus on sort of like feminist issues, to do with women's rights within a marriage, what they can do, what they cannot do, what they have rights for, what they don't have rights for. And I really enjoyed that part of it. Content warnings for homophobia and misogyny. Penelope also had another sort of problem on her side where she was married to a man, but you find out why they were married, and it's not cheating per se, it was a marriage of convenience to protect each other. So anyway, it was a slow burn romance. It was really good. It was so wholesome. I loved that the relationship had begun with a friendship, and that it didn't just jump straight from meeting each other and then being thrust into a romance. It was very slow and steady, and it was wholesome, and I really enjoyed it. I think Penelope and Agatha ended up developing so much respect for each other and literally put themselves and their reputation and everything on the line for each other's benefit. And I loved it so much. The only negative thing that has came out of reading this book is the fact that I would like to now keep bees. So that's a thing. I was also kind of surprised because I've read a lot of historical romance, and normally sex toys aren't really involved. But there's a couple of books in this where they were included. When it came to the intimate scenes, like there was stuff like they were using lubricants, and I know that a lot of the time with sex scenes in books, it's like he's absolutely dripping and is so ready, when that isn't the reality for everybody. So I like that they kind of included things that would normally be kind of forgot about in it. And like I said, another one of these books has the same sort of vibe where it's quite a realistic representation of a lot of people's sexual experiences. Like I said, it was wholesome. I loved the romance. I loved the fact that they had this friendship built before they ended up pursuing the romance, and it was just so good. This is what I want from a female-female relationship in historical fiction. I loved it so much. The next book on the list is The Request by Scarlett Peckham. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars, and this centres around the characters of Seraphina and Adam. So Seraphina is your typical rakish character that you often find in historical fictions, but in female form. She's very much about enjoying life and having sexual experiences and not getting tied down in relationships and stuff like that because of past bad experiences that she's had in her life. And she and her friends are on this kind of very feminist centered mission, and again, like with The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows, it kind of delves into, in historical times, women's rights within a marriage and a relationship, and how everything was kind of built up around reputation, and how people are viewed when they break out of those sort of social constraints. She is writing a memoir which exposes certain people's actions who have mistreated her in the past, and that she has essentially become this social outcast. She's this demonised figure. There's also discussion around slut shaming, and you were able to see the parallels, even though this is historical fiction that is set in like the 1800s, you do still see the parallels between today, because even today there isn't the same, we still don't have the same levels of sex positivity towards women as we do men. If men are deemed promiscuous, there isn't much grief given to them, whereas when it's a woman, it's a completely different story. So she ends up meeting Adam, who is an architect who unfortunately has a bit of a conflict of interest because he starts falling for Seraphina, but he's working for like the people that she's trying to expose, and she's very much against relationships because she's had these past experiences. So she doesn't really want to let him in. She just wants kind of some fun, no strings attached type situation. Along with the romance that was unfolding, like with The Care and Feeding of Waspish Widows, I can't say waspish, there was storylines sort of underneath that. which were tied into it with with a friend who had been basically institutionalized by her husband. Again, focusing on the rights that, or lack of rights, that women had back in the 1800s. For me, I read this more as a historical fiction with romance in it, because I felt that the story was more based on Seraphina, her growth, her healing, her experiences, and the sort of feminist tone of the times, where women were basically, it was like a witch hunt if women sort of stepped outside the lines of what was considered decency back then. So I wasn't particularly invested in the romance aspect of it, which is kind of unusual for me. I was more focused on Seraphina, her growth, her healing, and everything like that. So there are a few trigger warnings for the recase. There is miscarriage, loss of a loved one, alcoholism, misogyny. I liked Adam. He was a widower, seemed like a good guy, but I feel like he put too much focus on trying to save her, and not really focusing on the kind of strength that she has. In the end, he does end up standing up for her and stuff like that, and it does work out. I just don't feel like the romance was the main part of it for me personally. I listened to this on audio. The narrator was really good. It was an easy listen, and something that surprised me in this one, which was again kind of sex related, was the fact that they were using toys. I don't know what you can say that will get your videos taken down on YouTube when discussing the sexual component of romance fiction, but anyway, it was the fact that there was also sort of anal play involved with a male character. It caught me off guard. Again, it's not something that I've personally came across so far in heterosexual relationships in historical fiction. So was surprised, had no complaints about it. I was here for it, I enjoyed it. It had quite a nice balance of plot, character development, spiciness. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It just wasn't a 5-star for me, the way that I had seen people raving about it. Loving the so far very sex positive and feministy run that we seem to be going on with these books so far. Another thing that I'm appreciating so far is the romances are very wholesome, because even though there's conflict in the recase, the hero is very wholesome, and I am totally here for the wholesome cinnamon roll hero. I'm not particularly big on the kind of alpha males. The next book I read after the recase was The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. So this centres around the characters of Lena and Max. Lena is a wedding planner and ironically was jilted at her own wedding, but she gets this really big opportunity to work with a hotel to be a wedding planner for them. But when she meets up with a marketing team, the marketing team is her ex-fiance and his brother. And at this point in time, all we know at this point about Max, the brother, is he is allegedly responsible for causing the breakup between Lena and her ex-fiance. I don't actually remember what the brother's name is, but like that's not even really relevant. So when she meets the marketing team, she realises that she's going to have to work with the brothers. She's not happy about it, but she's refusing to give up this opportunity, so she pretends that she doesn't know them, they pretend that they don't know her, and they go about their business as normal. So Lena's not happy at the fact that she's having to work with Max, who she's viewing as the person who completely destroyed her potential marriage. you can feel the chemistry between the characters building really nicely. There was like one period in the book in particular that I really enjoyed, and they end up stuck at this kind of couples retreat, relationship building kind of thing, and they end up having to sort of pretend they're together and take part in these sort of activities and stuff like that, and it's through those activities you really see them bonding and see their relationship and see their feelings for each other kind of developing more. Like with the other books, very spicy. What I liked is obviously with every romance book that you read, there's a conflict, because there has to be conflict and resolution for you to get the happily ever after or the happy for now. And in this, a lot of the time, there's things that happen that are completely unnecessary, or there's things that happen that you think in a real life situation you wouldn't be able to come back from that, whether it be cheating or things that are said in arguments and stuff like that. But I feel like this one was really well done. I also loved the fact that there was a lot of focus put on Lena's culture. So that was sort of well represented throughout the whole book. I loved it. I loved the relationships between the main characters and the side characters as well. Lena's friendships and family relationships were really wholesome. And the family dynamics that Lena has are just lovely. Again, we have what is generally a kind of wholesome hero. He kind of just wants to do the kind of best thing for Lena and everything, and I really enjoyed it. The only thing I would maybe have like enjoyed would have been if there had been more kind of like angst and pining involved. Like it wasn't like the romance wasn't rushed, but I love pining and will they won't they, and I feel like there could have maybe been more of that in here, but that's just my own personal preference. The next book I read was You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It is a YA contemporary. This one, I loved it. It's a sort of coming of age female romance with the main character prevailing in the end and overcoming the odds and stuff like that. So it centres around the character of Liz, who is a queer teenage girl. She's one of the very few black kids in her school. It's a quite affluent school. She's not quite as rich as everybody else. She's not quite as popular as everybody else. Her mum had died when she was younger. So she doesn't have the same sort of family dynamic as everybody else that she goes to school with. And her mindset is, right, what I want to do is I want to get this funding to go to this college, and I'm going to get out of here, away from these people, away from this environment, and I'm going to succeed in life. But unfortunately, the funding for the scholarship falls through, and she's left with two options. She either has to find the money from somewhere, or she doesn't go to college, and she's not wanting to ask her grandparents for more money or anything like that, so she's sort of stuck. It turns out that there's going to be a scholarship offered to whoever wins the prom king and prom queen, and she's like, prom isn't my vibe, but I really am determined to get this scholarship, so I'm just going to go for it. So she ends up putting herself forward for prom queen. And there was anxiety rep in this that I really appreciated. She didn't like public speaking. She didn't like being the centre of attention. So it was heartwarming to see her push through that anxiety and achieve her goals. And amongst her campaigning for prom queen and going through this transformation where where people see another side of her and see what she's really like as a person, everybody ends up just adoring her, and she ends up fitting in places where she never imagined that she would fit in. There's a new girl turns up at the school. Her name is Mac, and the two of them have sort of instant attraction towards each other, and they end up forming this lovely, wholesome sort of romance that unfolds throughout the story. And Mac is also competing for prom queen. The conflict in this was very much centred around the prom queen vibe. I completely understood where both characters were coming from during the conflict. So you weren't left sort of angry at the other character. So there are some content warnings for this. There's racism and there's homophobia and loss of a loved one. I loved the sort of reconnection and friendship between Liz and her old friend. I think his name was Jordan. I could be completely wrong, but I'm almost positive his name was Jordan. Who had kind of grew apart when they went into high school because they had very different priorities and ended up falling into very different friend groups. Another thing that I loved, while she was sort of trying to combat the racism and the homophobia that was happening within the school and around the sort of social aspect of the prom, was the fact that they were all sort of coming together and standing up for the fact that not everybody has to be a certain way, not everybody has to follow the same path, like not everybody has to be this cookie cutter of a perfect person who's going to be palatable to society. Again, there was sort of feministy undertones. The relationship was very wholesome. I loved this book. So this was very deserving of the 5 stars I gave it. The next book I listened to on audio, and it was The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. I gave this one 5 stars. This was probably my favourite book that I have read so far this month. The story centres around Chloe and Jeremy. So there are these sort of local games / competition type thing that happens where Chloe lives, and it's called the Wedgeford Trials, where it's basically just this kind of community competition, and there's like kind of local marketplace vendors and things like that. It's good for the area. Boosts morale, everybody has fun, it's great. And she meets Jeremy one year when she was younger, and he kept coming back and taking part, and then they started developing a kind of, not a relationship, but kind of like really kind of bonding. And she was like, look, if you're serious about this, go away, grow up, come back, take it seriously, and we will be together. So he goes away, but he doesn't show up for 3 years. So she's kind of heartbroken. She's expecting him to turn up every year and he doesn't show up. So she kind of gives up all hope that he's going to be there. So she helps her dad run a business where he is making this sauce. So I should have said to begin with that the community that they live in is very diverse. Chloe is Chinese and Jeremy is Chinese British. I think his mum was Chinese and his dad was British. Chloe is working with her dad to make and create and sell this sauce. And along with that, I love that there was a focus on food. There was focus on sort of Chinese culture, which I appreciated being included in there. I should have said this is a historical romance set in the sort of Regency period. And anyway, so Jeremy comes back and she's a bit pissed off about it, but they form their friendship again.
Hello, it's Ed and Marianne here. I meant to say when I was talking about this that the banter between Jeremy and Chloe is amazing. Like, Jeremy is a bona fide tatter merchant, as we would call him here. Honestly, like, he's funny, he's charming, and totally gets away with the stuff that he says because of his kind of, like, just the way he is. Yeah. So, back to past Marianne.
Jeremy is more well off than everybody else that is in Wedgeford, and they're aware of it, but they don't acknowledge it. Like, everybody treats each other the same. They take the piss out of each other. Like they call him Posh Jim, but there's like no genuine resentment on anybody's side about it. So like I said, he's came back to take part, and she's more kind of focused on helping her dad at this point than sort of socializing and stuff. She's very kind of sharp, to the point. She's focused on her lists and getting things done. She sort of overwhelms herself to make other people happy and help other people, which I find very relatable because I'm very much the same way. Jeremy offers to help her, and she's like, you can't help me, you're just this kind of like pretty rich boy. But he goes out his way to prove her wrong. Jeremy is like the ultimate like wholesome sweetheart hero. I absolutely adored him. I think he might be my favourite historical romance hero thus far. He is the main conflict in the book isn't even really a conflict. He is a duke, but he doesn't want to tell anybody there that he is a duke and that he essentially owns Wedgeford. Like, a big part of their blossoming relationship is him struggling with the fact that he has to tell her that he basically owns where she lives, he owns a house. And obviously there's expectations of him as a duke to marry within his class. So when the conflict happens, it's not this big massive thing that is unpleasant. Like, you see him struggling with it throughout the book. There is no malice involved. It's not like he's lying there out of spite or to cover up some deep dark secret. He's genuinely mortified at the fact that he's a duke, and he just wants to take part in normal life with these people that he kind of ended up growing up with because of the Wedgeford trials. But yeah, it was such a wholesome romance. And this kind of like hits all the points for me. So we have friends to lovers, which I love. We have a romance between different social classes, which I love. We have the wholesome hero, which I adore. And we have close family relationships. We have diversity. It's just so good. And then when we get to the steamier scenes in the book, again, they're so wholesome. Like, the fact that they are both losing their V card together at the same time. It's not like in a lot of romance where their first time is like this mind-blowing situation where it's like the first time they've ever had sex and it's like the most mind-blowing experience and it's like the best sex. It's like the ultimate experience. Like, it's awkward and it's sweet and it's wholesome, and I just loved it so much. Again, very sex positive, and I loved the fact that Chloe was able to speak up and say what she liked and what she didn't like and offer guidance. Yeah, I just loved it so much. Again, completely deserving of the 5 stars I gave it. There was nothing I disliked about this book whatsoever. There was very much a lot of pining, particularly on Jeremy's side. You could tell that he just adored her, and I loved it. It was definitely one I could go back and reread. I really enjoyed it. It was so good. It was just sheer perfection. And again, the narrator was really good. Like, they had quite a few characters, and you were able to sort of discern between them when she was doing the dialogue, so appreciated that. 100% would recommend to anybody that likes historical romance, especially if you enjoy a wholesome romance with a wholesome hero that is just sweet as sugar. The next book I read was You Had Me At Ola by Alexis Daria, and again, another 5-star. So this is a contemporary romance between 2 Latinx characters. They are both actors. We have Jasmine, who is an actress, and Ashton, who is an actor, and they both star in telenovelas. And Jasmine has just been through this very public, very messy sort of breakup, and she is like, no, I'm going to be this strong, independent woman. I don't need a man. I'm going to live my best life, be this strong woman, and she has this set of rules that she's going to follow to ensure that she has this good look in the public eye. Ashton has had quite a traumatic experience. He's a single dad, but his son isn't in the picture. Not because he's like abandoned him out of lack of love, but to protect him. And then the two of them ended up working. His character gets killed off. And I can't remember why she was no longer working on the soap opera she was working in. What is wrong with me today? My memory is terrible. Anyway, so they end up in this show together called Carmen in Charge. They have a really funny meet cute at the start where he sort of spills coffee on her and she ends up in this ridiculous outfit. So it wasn't the whole love at first sight situation, but they are both sort of instantly attracted to each other. So the two of them have to have believable on-screen chemistry, and so far it's not really there. So the two of them end up kind of rehearsing backstage to create this chemistry. She's trying to keep kind of closed off because she doesn't want to get into this relationship, and she's trying to keep up the strong independent woman front. And he doesn't want to get into a relationship because he's trying to keep his private life very private for him and and particularly his son's benefit. So they're trying to fight off these feelings that they have for each other and this attraction that they have between each other, but it's so strong that they just can't help it. This is the book I was talking about when I was discussing the female historical romance. You have a more realistic representation of sex in a romance book. There are condoms involved, there is lube involved, there's anxiety rep. I don't believe it's explicitly stated that Ashton has anxiety, but it's very clear through his sort of thought processes and his actions and his experiences throughout the book. Again, wholesome hero, nice sort of slowish burn romance. It's not particularly slow, but it's slow enough that it doesn't feel rushed. There's focus put on Latinx culture as well. The representation is great. They have non-binary side characters, they have queer side characters. It's so well done. I absolutely adored the ending of this. It ended so well, it was so wholesome. It was just everything I needed and more at the time where I read this, because I wasn't very well when I read this last week, which is why I didn't post. So it was what I needed to help me feel better. So the next book I read this month was Written in the Stars by Alexandria Bellfleur. I absolutely loved this book. Again, another 5-star. The Ripped Bodice really did pick some belters. Written in the Stars is a female-female relationship between Elle and Darcy. I believe that Darcy is a lesbian and Elle is bisexual, so you have some bi rep in there. Appreciated that. Elle is an astrologer, and Darcy works with numbers. I can't remember if she's an accountant. Is she an accountant? She's an actuary. An actuary. So their first meeting is disastrous. Elle's co-worker / boss sets them up on a date. Elle is very much stars in her eyes, believes in true love and everything like that. Darcy is quite cynical. She had a really kind of shitty relationship with her ex in the end. So she's quite closed off to the idea of true love and having a relationship.
Oh, I didn't marry Anne again. I meant to say as well, like, Darcy does not believe in astrology whatsoever, so it's very much an opposites attract situation. Like, she believes there is zero validity whatsoever in Elle's career path, which rubs Elle up the wrong way. So it creates a kind of instant dislike. So there's that.
So Darcy's brother is pretty much on her case constantly, trying to set her up with people. And when he asks how their date had went, she was like, it was great, it was fine, loved it. and then her and Elle end up doing this fake dating situation. They put a time limit on it just to keep him off her back. And also Elle has quite a complex relationship with her family, because she has this job as an astrologer and not a serious job. She's like, right, if I have Darcy on my side who's an actuary, nice respectful job, might look better in their eyes, because our siblings' relationships are very highly regarded by our parents, and she's kind of not taken seriously in general. So this fake relationship is ongoing, and again, it's so wholesome. There's chemistry between the two of them. The romance seems really genuine. It's just so lovely. I was shipping these two from the get-go. I didn't really like the conflict in it. I feel like Darcy kind of got my back up a little bit. But again, because you're seeing both, but again, you kind of understand her reasoning behind why she's acting the way she is. It felt unnecessary. Like, I wish it could have gone through as completely happy all the way through, and then maybe the conflict at the end was just Darcy sort of coming to terms with the fact that she did believe in love and that she loved Elle, instead of having this kind of point where Elle ended up sort of really hurt by Darcy's actions. But I could forgive it for just how good the romance was. I loved it. Like, the things that they do for each other are really sweet. Both of them are really thoughtful, and both of them do genuinely care about each other. And like I said, totally felt the chemistry, totally felt the romance, believable couple. Again, nice and spicy, was into that, and I just appreciated everything about this story. Also, Darcy has to go with Elle to visit Elle's family for Thanksgiving. Is it Thanksgiving or is it Christmas? It's Thanksgiving. And you really see how kind of toxic her family dynamic is and how shitty her parents can be. And that's at a point where you see them really kind of standing up for themselves and standing up for each other. Because Darcy ends up so frustrated that people can't see Elle for who she is as a person. And because everybody's judging her on a really sort of superficial level, where it's her job and not who she is, because she's such a sweetheart. But I like the fact that Elle did end up standing up for herself, and also she sort of realised her worth. Like, when the conflict with Darcy happened, there wasn't like this instant forgiveness. She is like, no, you made me feel this way, you hurt me, so this is how I feel. She didn't just go, oh yeah, thanks for the apology, I love you, this is fine, happily ever after. So, the next book I read was The Roommate by Rosie Danan, and this was one I had anticipated to be a 5-star, but I think I ended up giving it 4. So we have Clara and Josh. Clara is a socialite who is part of this wealthy family that just doesn't handle scandal. If you cause any sort of scandal, you are shunned. And she already has this kind of like not great relationship with her family anyway. So she has a crush on this guy. She's convinced she's in love with him. They were like best friends at school. So he invites her to come and sort of live with him because she wants to do something different with her life, and she wants to do something different with her life. She wants to break free from the sort of confines of expectations, and she's convinced that if she goes and lives with this guy, Ethan or Evan, one of the two. But when she gets there, it turns out that he is actually going on tour with his band, so she has to share the home with a roommate, and it turns out that this roommate is Josh. And she doesn't know this, but Josh is an adult entertainer. He acts in porn films. So he's kind of trying to keep that away from her because they're building this kind of like nice close bond and they're friends and stuff like that. But then she goes to see her aunt, who is one of the shunnies of her family, and she's like, "Wait, that's the guy that you're living with right now," and tells her basically, "Look, your roommate does porn." So she goes home and he catches her watching one of his films, which opens up a dialogue between the two of them. Things start to get a bit spicy. And yeah. So anyway, so she ends up turning her focus. So career wise at this point, she is trying to get the DA re-elected, and the DA is very much and the DA is quite conservative. But alongside that, she is setting up this website with Josh that is very sex positive, and making sure couples are getting satisfaction from each other, because she has had very sort of unsatisfying sexual experiences.
Oh, Ed and Marianne has returned for the third time. I meant to say, because Josh has experience, he decides to offer her first climax at the hands of another person, because usually she has to kind of finish herself off. So that's how the kind of spiciness of the relationship begins. Yeah, it was very respectful, very consensual, and your boys stand.
It's all about kind of education and taking away the shame of talking about it and dealing with it. But the DA finds out and it causes kind of conflict between her jobs, which is a thing. But the main focus, like, for me, was the relationship between Josh and Clara. Now, I didn't particularly warm to Clara as a character. I don't feel like there was enough there for me to say that she was likable or unlikable. It was just she was there. But Josh, like Jeremy from before, so wholesome. Oh, just loved him. Very big on consent, very big on being respectful. Anytime they have any sort of vaguely sexual interaction, he is very focused on consent and comfort and ensuring that she's enjoying the experience as well as him. It's very unselfish. So there's that, on top of the fact that he's just genuinely a really nice guy. And also he wears glasses at times, and I am a sucker for a guy or girl or anybody in glasses. Everybody's got a kink. So in amongst all of this stuff that's happening, Josh, Clara and Naomi are trying to expose the sort of treatment that adult entertainers are facing, and the sort of moral and ethical treatment of their actors and the things that they are sort of producing and putting out there into the world from these big porn empires. And they're basically trying to take down this specific studio slash business within the porn sector. So not only do you have the sex positivity in general, there's no demonizing of the sex workers, there's no disrespect towards the sex workers. It's very much focused on keeping these sex workers safe, giving them reasonable contracts, making sure that the content that they're making is safe, and the actors are well taken care of, adequately paid. There is also discussion around how people in the porn industry are treated by their peers and their family and stuff like that. and it's just generally a very positive book. It's positive towards women, it is sex positive, it is supportive of sex workers while still acknowledging that there are harmful situations that they can fall into, but it's not their fault. It's the fault of the industry that they are in, where not everybody is trying to protect them. There are people just trying to capitalize on what they are doing. So I fucking loved it. And also, I didn't realize that dry humping could be so erotic. So normally you kind of attribute that to kind of horny teenagers, but yeah, apparently adults can vibe with that as well. And to be honest with you, I was vibing with it when I was reading it. So, do you know, the more I'm thinking about this, the more I'm maybe wanting to give it 5 stars. But it's the fact that I just didn't really become. It's just the fact that I wasn't very fond of Clara that kind of holds me back. I meant to say actually at points during this wrap up so far that the majority of these books are very body positive as well, and there's like a wide age range involved. Obviously with the YA you've got kind of young adults there, but I'm sure that in the relationship and the Request both characters are a wee bit older than your average sort of early 20 something characters that you get in historical romance. And also in the Care and Feeding of Washbush Widows, the characters are both in their mid to late 40s, and one of the characters is plus size. So there's that as well. The next book that I read was quite a disappointment, because last month I absolutely gushed about Rhapsody by Kenya Wright, and this month I read Dirty Kisses by Kenya Wright. I gave it 2 stars, and then I took it to 3 stars. Then I took it to 2 stars again, and we're just gonna say 2.5. I had really big expectations because I had such a good experience with Rhapsody that this was gonna be fantastic, but it just didn't really do much for me. So we have the characters of Kaz and Emily. Kaz works for the Russian mafia. He is also known as the Lion. And we have Emily, who is an artist, but she also dabbles in money laundering. So the guy that normally launders money for Kaz is killed. So he comes from Russia to New York to find out what's going on, and he ends up taking his business to Emily and is like, Emily, you can just do the money laundering for me now. And there's like sexual tension between them and they have sex, but it just wasn't really for me. I felt like there wasn't really much to the characters. The premise for the plot was quite good. Trying to find out who this killer is and who's trying to kind of take down Kaz's empire and stuff. But like, I don't know, I just wasn't feeling it. It's making me think that maybe Rhapsody is the only mafia romance that I'm ever going to enjoy. Oh, there's some content warnings as well. It's quite gory, what you would expect from kind of mafia based romance anyway, with regards to violence. On that note, the last book I read this month was An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn, which is the 3rd book in the Bridgerton series and was a reread for me. So this one is based on Benedict, who is the 2nd oldest of the Bridgerton siblings, and Sophie, who is the bastard daughter of the Earl of Penwood. So it starts off with strong Cinderella vibes, and it's not even kind of like implications of Cinderella, it's like straight up Cinderella, including leaving a glass slipper, except instead of a glass slipper it's a freaking glove. So anyway, Sophie's dad has died, and even though she was a bastard daughter, he kept her, looked after her and treated her the same way that you would generally treated her the same way that you would treat a daughter, albeit without the whole lovey-dovey aspect. But he ends up marrying this woman called Araminta, who is a cow. She wasn't nice to Sophie anyway, but after her dad's death, like, she was proper bad to her. She was basically an unpaid servant in her own house. Araminta has lied about the will that the Earl of Penwood had left and what Sophie is entitled to and how Sophie is supposed to be treated. But there is a masquerade ball, and in true Cinderella fashion, everybody ensures that Sophie can attend the ball, and that's where she meets Benedict. And this was my first issue, was the insta love, because Benedict becomes like actual obsessed. Fair enough, it's just fiction, but yeah, so that part, like, I didn't feel the chemistry straight away. And she leaves at midnight, goes home, and is soon thereafter kicked out because Araminta finds out that she wore her shoes and attended the ball behind her back. So she ends up working for another family as a servant, and unfortunately the son keeps making sort of sexual advances on her that she is pretty much against, and she decides one night that she's had enough and she's just going to leave. And then the son and some friends kind of accost her as she's trying to leave and makes attempts to sexually assault her. And Benedict, who is at this party that she's trying to leave during, breaks up the situation, ensures that she's safe, and that the men know that they've been shitty and to leave her alone. So he ends up sort of taking responsibility for her, and he's like, look, I can take you somewhere safe. You can't walk about at night with no money. I'll take you somewhere safe and we'll find you a job and stuff like that. But on the way, he gets sick, and she ends up looking after him at his cottage because the housekeepers aren't there. It's quite sweet. I like the way that she's looking after him, and then they develop this kind of bantery friendship, and then it's clear that they're falling for each other. So while I didn't like the insta love at the start with a woman at the masquerade, with Sophie at the masquerade and Benedict at the masquerade, I liked how the relationship developed from friendship into a kind of more loving relationship when they meet each other again. But unfortunately, she recognises Benedict, but he doesn't recognise her from the ball. Which is weird because she was only wearing a demi mask. You can still see someone's eyes, and you can still see the kind of lower half of the face. So, and he's been apparently obsessing about this woman from the masquerade for the past 2 years. So if she's been in his mind that much and he still doesn't recognise her. Like, anyway, they form chemistry anyway, and they end up expressing their feelings for each other. But because he is of a certain social class, and also because he's kind of still holding out for this girl from the masquerade, he says to her, look, I can't marry you, so you're just going to have to be my mistress. And she is so against that because she's obviously the product of the upper class having sexual relations with the lower classes, and she doesn't want to foist that upon another child. But she is still refusing to disclose to him that, one, she is the woman from the masquerade, and two, that she is the Earl of Penwood's daughter, because Araminta has basically told her, you need to stay away from here, don't tell anyone who you are, or else I'm going to get you arrested for theft and I'm going to make your life a living hell. But Benedict is not having it, so when he leaves his home to go back to his actual home in London, he's like, I can find you a job with my mum, you can work for my mum. So Lady Bridgerton, who is queen throughout this whole book, takes her on as a lady's maid, but there's something not sitting quite right because she's very well spoken, she's had an education, and she makes up all these lies about where she came from and how her childhood was and stuff like that. Violet can see that there's some sort of chemistry and like love situation happening between Benedict and Sophie, and while obviously they're of different social classes technically, Violet, you already know from the previous books, and if you've watched the series, Violet was part of a love match, and she loves love and she wants her children to be happy. She absolutely adores her children and just wants them to be happy and in love. So she's not particularly bothered. Sophie and Benedict continue to kind of grow closer because he is very forward in his pursuit of her, which kind of annoyed me because I really like Benedict, but I feel like he was a bit an arse with the way that he pursued her. Thankfully, in the end, he does acknowledge that he was overly forceful in pursuing her and should have respected her decisions and her wishes and what she was saying, instead of just constantly badgering her into becoming his mistress. So props to him for that, but it still rubbed me up the wrong way when it was going on through the book. There is conflict at the end of the book, but it's a spoiler, so I don't want to divulge what it was. But basically Violet comes to the rescue, and she's such a bad bitch. Like, Violet is like the pinnacle of parenting. Like, she will advocate for her children. She will advocate for things that she cares about. She straight up does not give a fuck. So yeah, she like saved the book for me. I gave it 4 stars. I was gonna give it 3 as I was reading it, but then when it came to the point where we had the conflict and resolution happen, I was like, no, this deserves the 4 because it was well done, even though I wasn't keen on the Cinderella aspect, and I thought that Benedict was exhibiting some serious toxic masculinity at points throughout the book. There was chemistry there was romance there was enough drama without it being overly extra, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That is all of the books that I consumed over the first half of March. It has been amazing so far. There's been a wide variety of subgenres. There's been a wide variety of tropes. There has been sex positivity. There's been sex positivity. There has been body positivity. It has just been a wholesome month. It has just been a wholesome month so far, and I am thriving. Hopefully this is getting posted on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, I have a Kindle Unlimited haul that I downloaded before the Kindle Clear Out readathon, so that'll be coming on Thursday, and I'll see you then. So stay safe, happy reading, and I'll speak to you later. Bye.